I want to welcome everyone first to Sunday Morning Zen and the new people. Of course, I love seeing new people here. So Trixie, great Trixie. Hi, how are you? And then I see our old friends, Peter Cunningham and Ara Fitzgerald from Massachusetts. Yay, fabulous. And I saw Felix was here too. Hi, Felix. Welcome to Sunday Morning Zen. Great. And Alpita is here. All right, Alpita. Yay. Our speaker next week on a very interesting topic. Yes, very great. All right, some folks we haven't seen for a while. Michelle Nordmeyer, great. Maureen Madden. Yeah, Michelle and Maureen Madden, welcome, welcome. All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce Jaune Evans. Ando Kanchi is her Dharma name. And Jaune and I, a few years ago, did a wonderful, we called it a sacred fire meditation and hula retreat, calling it the heart and hula of compassion, dance of compassion, right? On Hawaii Island where the volcano is, right, Jaune? That was pretty darn cool, and we're gonna have to do it again. So Jaune, I met Jaune again, it was about 5 years or so ago, where Susan Moon and Florence Kaplow, who wrote The Hidden Lamp, held a women's retreat at Tassajara around their book. And so I and Mary Susan Chen decided we're gonna go, and I had never been to Tassajara. So that is where I met Jaune, who come to, you know, who knew that she also knew. She was in the White Plum, so she knew Bernie and Jishu, who she's going to talk about today, and Eve Marco, of course, Peter Cunningham. Small world, and that's how our relationship blossomed from there. So Jaune was ordained as a priest in the White Plum Lineage by Bernie Glassman and also Maezumi Roshi in 1983. At the Zen community of New York. And she is now a priest and senior teacher in the Bay Area everyday Zen Sangha in the Shunryu Suzuki Branching Streams lineage of Norman Fischer, who we all love and respect his writings. And she received Dharma Transmission in 2019 at Tassajara Zen Mountain Center. And she was telling me it was a freezing cold time of year there. And she leads now the Heart of Compassion Zen Sangha in Point Reyes, California. And she is in Northern California. And she practices and studies at the intersections of traditional and contemporary spiritual life. And she engages with other Zen teachers and sanghas in meeting the challenges of racial, gender, socio-economic, and climate injustice. She is also the executive director of the Tamalpais Trust, a philanthropic foundation which supports and helps to protect indigenous peoples' sacred lands and waters. Cultural and human rights, gender empowerment, and global justice alliance building. Jaune, you are remarkable. Absolutely. So with that, I would like to turn it over to my dear friend and spiritual sister, Jaune Evans.
Thank you so much. I was explaining to my small group that I have been outdoors this morning because I have a small puppy who's 9 months old, and she needed to go out, but the air quality here is very bad, and my voice suffered in being out there. So if you in any way need me to speak up or slow down or something, just raise your finger, June, please. And just to thank you and Roshi for what a wonderful, amazing Sangha this is, and how you have built a community I know that is vibrant and also at the intersection of so much of contemporary life and bringing the ancient traditions forward. I'm just really, really honored to be here. And yes, to also give a shout out to Peter and Ara there in Massachusetts. Peter kept telling me years ago, you need to meet June. You need to meet June. June and Joshin, they're my friends. You have to meet them. So how nice to be able to be part of a sacred family too. So this talk was originally given as part of the Breadloaf Mountain Center one-day workshop with Joshin Brian Burns. And then it's been revised some because I gave it again for the Everyday Zen seminar that I did in the month of September on the great disciples of the Buddha. And I had done a very, for me, a challenging dive into the ancients, into the original disciples through the Bhikkhu Bodhi book called The Great Disciples of the Buddha, which I have to say was fabulous, but also it took, especially in this pandemic time, it took a lot of focus to read a page because it was so dense and had this sort of holographic historical context of the disciples. And after doing 3 of those talks, one on Ananda and Shariputra, another one on Mahapajapati and Kema, and then a 3rd one on Dogen and Suzuki Roshi, I decided that I wanted to do some praising of a great disciple who I knew. And so this talk about Sandra Jishu Holmes is close to my heart, and also wonderful that I can share it with other people who knew her, and that her photograph sits on your ancestor's altar. I'm going to try, if I can be made co-host, to share my screen and to show you a few photos. And yeah, okay. So the way I usually am able to start writing is to take several threads that appear and to be able to try and weave them together. So as you follow me, I think there is a weave that starts to happen. So these are Jishu's own words. All our paths are superintended. You have always been on the path. You can't fall off. Everything is conspiring to lead you home, to experience your true nature. Everything you are doing right now, including all the mess-ups and screw-ups and mistakes, are exactly the right thing for you to learn what you need to know more as you go along the path. All the causes and conditions of your unique life have brought you to this moment, and given your particular set of causes and conditions, you have always done your best. You can't fall off the path. So now I want to read the Book of Serenity, case 10. It's the case 31 in the Gateless Gate. There was an old woman on Mount Dai, and a monastic asked her as he traveled the path, "Where is the path to Mount Dai?" The old woman said, "Go right straight ahead." The monastic went on. And the woman said, "My dear Reverend, you too go off like that." Monastics came one after another, asking the same question, receiving the same answer. And later, one of the monastics told Zhao about it, and Zhao said, "Well, wait here. I'll go check her out." And he went to the old woman and said, "Where is the path to Mount Dai?" And the woman said, "Go right straight ahead." Zhao went on. The woman said, "My dear Reverend, you too go off like that." And Zhao came back and said to the assembly, "I have checked out that old woman for you." One of those mystical stories. A quote from a Rumi poem. "Stay together, friends. Don't scatter and sleep. Our friendship is made of being awake. Stay here, quivering with each moment like a drop of mercury." Buddhas and ancestors of old were as we. We in the future shall be Buddhas and ancestors. Revering Buddhas and ancestors, we are one Buddha and one ancestor, awakening Bodhi mind. We are one Bodhi mind. Because they extend their compassion to us freely and without limit, we are able to attain Buddhahood and to let go of our attainment. Those who in past lives were not enlightened will now be enlightened. In this life, save the body, which is the fruit of many lives. Before Buddhas were enlightened, they were the same as we. Enlightened people of today are exactly as those of old. So that's from Dogen, the Eihei Koso Hotsuganmon. This morning, I'm inviting you to remember with me a great disciple, Venerable Sandra Jishu Holmes, a human ancestor, the same as we enlightened people of today, and exactly as those of old. Hers is a different kind of great disciple story, not presented in the same deep time lineage as Ananda and Mahapajapati, Dogen, or Suzuki Roshi. Jishu is part of our emerging American Zen story, contemporary, not exactly wrapped, not neat in a mythological package, but a story nested in what Thich Nhat Hanh predicts as the next Buddha, Maitreya, the Buddha of love, will be the Sangha. That's where Jishu's story rests, is there. The next Buddha, the Buddha of love, Maitreya, will be the Sangha. So if you can, close your eyes and imagine with me for a moment. Imagine you are standing with me in a grand stone entryway of a 26-room Victorian mansion, perched high above the silvery Hudson River on an emerald green hill of velvety grass and trees. We're waiting for a new Zen student who's due to appear any minute on foot, walking from the bus, which has brought her from the city to this hillside, to what is often called a place of old wealth. Its natural, pristine beauty, now the home of Grayston Seminary, the Zen community of New York. You gaze into the leafy red and gold October maples arching across the driveway as the golden late afternoon light amplifies autumn's ecstasy. Daydreamy, happy for the few minutes of rest from your kitchen job, of chopping and dishes. You and I now suddenly see a young woman with a Buster Brown haircut emerging from the shadows into that golden light. She wears green knee socks, brown Oxfords, a white blouse with a Peter Pan collar, a blue and green plaid skirt, and a sweater tied around her waist. Carrying a beat-up old leather book bag over her shoulder, she looks like a high school girl at first. But as she comes closer, she's actually much older, maybe 40. A sad-eyed brunette, a beauty with lines of worry furrowing her brow. It's not possible to know if it's the weight of the book bag or the weight of her life that makes her hunch forward a bit, but I immediately like her. It's also not possible to know she's exactly as those of old, just one Bodhi mind awakening, just one approaching Buddha, a Zen ancestor who will dream of and co-create a new American stream of Bodhisattva practice, a new expression of Sangha, a peacemaking on the ground community based on 3 bold vows: the vow of not knowing, the vow of bearing witness, and the vow to take action in our life. So you can open your eyes now. And I want to show you a picture of her that I think is the way I would say I remember. Let's see. That's how I remember her in those early days. I don't know when this was taken. This is one of Peter's wonderful pictures, but it is a good representation of early Jishu. So today's talk, this remembering of her, came about because I heard a beautiful Dharma talk online about her this past spring by Petra Hugling, who you may know, a Soto Zen priest from the Netherlands in the Zen Peacemaker order. And she offered the talk as, I think it was part of her Shuso talks through Upaya and also her study at Breadloaf Mountain Center. And the talk, which was so moving, was a total surprise to me. I was simply listening to all the talks of the women ancestors who were being talked about during that practice period. And suddenly there she was, and there was Jishu. I think that if Petra and Jishu had been able to know each other in this life, they would have been very, very good friends. So I just want to dedicate this talk to Petra and to Jishu. Ananda once asked the Buddha, Lord, isn't half the holy life spiritual friendship? No, no, answered the Buddha. Having good friends isn't half of the holy life. Having good friends is the whole of holy life. So after listening to Petra's talk, I was walking in the green hills around my home, and her tenderness, the quality of her voice, the deep caring had really stayed in me. And I sat down and just really felt the missing, the grief of my own spiritual friendship with Jishu. All the research that Petra had done, the quotes that she'd gotten from personal journals, the way she credited Jishu with the co-creation of Zen peacemakers, which I'm not sure was always quite as evident because, of course, Bernie was the combustion engine and they needed it. He needed each other to do it. But it was in our late night talks after Lights Out that she first came up with the idea. It was not so possible at that moment to even think that that would become a reality because we were both working very hard in the bakery at that time. So I sat down under a tree and I started for the first time really to grieve her. I started to cry. Old and new salty tears is how I've talked about it. Remembering her life and her death, remembering our Jukai together, our priest ordination, Tokudo together, the Ramana Maharshi photograph she had on the shelf in our room, and she would speak to him often. That was her first teacher, her Vedanta teacher. And it was clear that she had made some sort of friendship with him in addition to being his student. It was that spiritual friend also that came through so clearly. My own teacher, Norman, has talked about the Magaya Sutra as his favorite Pali text about friendship. And it tells the story of an eager young monk, Magaya, who wanted to practice meditation alone in an especially peaceful and beautiful mango grove. But Magaya's meditation was anything but peaceful and beautiful. You may be able to identify. To his shock, he found his mind a snarl of malicious, lustful, and confused thoughts. Probably because his practice was too self-involved. And when Magaya rushed back to report his confusing experience, the Buddha was not at all surprised. He took the opportunity to give Magaya what he must have hoped would be a very relevant teaching. He said to him, 5 things induce release of heart and lasting peace. First, a lovely intimacy with good friends. Second, virtuous conduct. Third, frequent conversations that inspire and encourage practice. Fourth, diligence, energy, and enthusiasm for the good. And fifth, insight into impermanence. Norman has often shared over the years about the death of his best friend, Alan Liu, Rabbi Alan Liu. They were Tassajara together early years when Alan Liu was studying Zen before he knew that his true vocation was to be a rabbi. The depth of Norman's grief extended many years into these Dharma talks, and people actually were a bit worried. He was quite dark about all of it. Alan Liu had gone out in the midst of a retreat they were teaching together. He'd gone out for a walk, and he had a heart attack and died immediately on the path. Didn't come back after the break. So Norman, as he grieved, began to feel the need to make a vow to Alan, which he did. He vowed that he would bring forward in himself the quality of compassion that Alan Liu had so generously shared with others during his lifetime. And although Norman says he's not naturally compassionate, and it's been a challenging practice for him, most of us who study with him, well, we don't really totally believe that, but we do think that it has made him go deeper, and to say it aloud and to encourage all of us. Jishu also felt she was not naturally compassionate, not able to be with another's suffering. Her default statement when overtired and overworked, impatient and grumpy was, "I'm so self-absorbed. I don't care about anyone except myself. It makes me sick." Well, literally at times, her suffering did make her sick. She broke down emotionally and physically, in private and in front of others, many times in those early years. And I don't remember all the circumstances, but I know she had to take a break from the community several times to go away from it and from all of us. And when she returned, her naked honesty about herself, I couldn't take it anymore. I fell apart. It was an awesome truth for the rest of us, especially the other monks, as we were called in those days. Awesome for us to hear another one of us admit falling apart. Her courage, admitting such vulnerability, lack of focus, lack of endurance, what was certainly perceived as weakness, awakened and brought forward something we all knew and recognized in ourselves, a difficult truth, our self-involvement, our lack of understanding and compassion for ourselves, and probably for others too. This honesty was just one of her beautiful qualities, her truthfulness. She was a great disciple of truthfulness, full of truth, so obvious in her facial and physical expressions. There was no artifice or pretension. It was impossible for her to mask her feelings, glad or sad, and sometimes it frustrated her a great deal. She was intense and an indefatigable practitioner, committed, passionate, humble. But she was also aloof, very distant at times, sad, emotionally volatile, unpredictable. Eve Marco wrote a wonderful talk about her on the 19th anniversary of her death in 2018. And the biography, a couple of paragraphs I'll read, says a lot that I just thought you should hear about her. Jishu was born in California in 1941. She came out east and went to Columbia University and became a biochemist. She did early research in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, but she was really a seeker. Academia was really hard for her. At first, she pursued Vedanta, as I said, in the teachings of Ramana Maharshi. She went to visit his ashram in India and then continued to practice in New York with a Vedanta Society group. She even taught herself Sanskrit. But finally, around 1981, she left her work and came to live at the Zen community of New York in Riverdale. In addition to her regular schedule of meditation, she began to study, do retreats, and she then got involved in the community business, which was already underway, the bakery you probably all heard about. And she began to be, in some ways, the administrative head, which was exactly what she didn't want to do. I remember her as slim, very pale, pretty, dark-haired, overworked. She was highly intelligent and deeply committed to practice, as I said. And she ordained as a priest with me in 1983. And in 1986, we started our first social action ministry, the Grayston Family Inn, and she was named its director. I'm going to share my screen with you just one more time here to show you a picture, old picture. Let's see, this one I have to blow up to be bigger. There we go. That's as big as it gets, I think. So there we are in our priest ordination, standing on the altar at the Zen community of New York. Fun to be able to show that. So the Grayston Family Inn was built to make apartments for homeless families, mostly single mothers with children. It was in Yonkers in Westchester County, which at that time had the highest per capita rate of homelessness in the country. And as Eve writes, we had almost no money and no professionals in the field. And the Yonkers community did not welcome us right away. We were building everything from scratch. It took just 4 years to get the first housing project, 18 apartments purchased, renovated, and opened to families. But for Jishu, other things were even more difficult than doing the apartments and the building of the Grayston Inn. You know, in many ways, like Magaya, she wanted to practice in a beautiful and quiet mango grove. She was what she called a hermit. She'd said she'd always wanted to just be a nun and practice in seclusion. And there she was, the Zen community of New York, thrust into a communal setting, living in the midst of a large group of people in one house. And when she became the head of Grayston Family Inn, there were people around her, morning, noon, and night. Not just Zen practitioners, construction workers with immigration problems, the local ethnic community that frowned on these strange white Zen people living in their midst, the creditors who called her day in and day out asking for money. She was the go-between with the New York government bureaucracy. And most of all, she was the person who listened and tried to take action for the single mothers with children from backgrounds of poverty and drugs and alcohol. All of those people she was trying to help. By temperament, she wasn't sociable or gregarious, and actually rather shy and short-tempered. And her biggest worry was that she was not likable. But by choice, she took it all on. Choice, and in my opinion, it was also by faith. She had faith in this practice. At first, when other students would ask her, "What's going on with you? Why are you so nervous? What's the matter?" she would stumble and flush over what to say, wanting to hide. She suffered from depression and emotional pain, insomnia. There were private mysteries, family miseries, a tendency to become visibly exhausted, exasperated, self-critical, comparing herself to others, especially her father. And Petra found a quote in her journal which said, "My father was a seeker all his life. He could never find peace. He could never see that everything that happens to him, his whole world, seems to be a struggle against the enemy, both internal and external." So sometimes Jishu too would struggle with the enemy, closing off from others for several days. And there were great worries about her at times. We were all exhausted, though, in those early days. Many of us self-critical, doubting our endurance and even our own faith at times. And mostly we tried to hide it. But being Jishu's roommate, I benefited from how she challenged herself, how she tried hard not to fall down with her exhaustion, her disarrayed self, but somehow to get up again, to learn to smile. It was a big task, actually, to learn to be lighten up. I knew she had plenty of pain, but that faith was something greater than the pain. And it gave her the strength to not turn away from it, to keep getting up with her vow to save and serve all beings, including, not last or least, herself. And we had taken those vows together, lay and priest ordination, and we had studied the precepts, written about them, presented them in our one-on-one examinations with Maezumi, Roshi, and Bernie. And we had discussed many issues, fears, hopes, dreams, together, those after lights out roommate discussions. And as two women priests living full-time in the community, Jishu and I both felt an enormous responsibility to make it work, to be of service, to live a life of faith, to give our best effort to stabilizing our shaky Zen community, trying with others to make the Greyston Bakery and Cafe sources of sustainable and ethical livelihood for our community. And we agreed that the community needed to include homeless people, people with mental and physical disabilities, refugee families living in Yonkers, African Americans living deep in the projects of the Bronx, people in recovery, formerly incarcerated men, women, and youth. But we agreed that our Zen Center leadership needed to be more horizontal, less hierarchical, more women in leadership positions, and that the Sangha had to operate holistically with less crisis-driven practice. I can remember the cries in the bakery at night, "Not enough yeast to complete the bread order." Then our only Greyston bakery van breaking down on the Bronx Expressway, carrying our entire day's delivery. Or Maezumi Roshi calling from LA, saying, "I'm flying in tonight, and I've invited 100 Japanese people for dinner." But we had no more credit at the market to get the food. It was a very tough time. Jishu would become so stressed out, so sleep deprived, so rattled, that she would eventually scream, sobbing at the reality of what Bernie used to say. There were more fires than any of us could put out. And she would say, "We need some space and time. We need to be truthful about who we are." So in one of my old journals, I found these words in her handwriting on a birthday card dated October 1983, written just a few weeks after our priest ordination. And they're words from an article by Brother David Stendelrest. The article is called "The Monk in Us." The one truth for all of us is that we must have courage to give ourselves to truth. Fear hangs on. Fear always grabs for something. Faith is precisely letting go. So after being ordained, she practiced more and more with letting go of fear, not putting out every fire, actually lightening up a bit. She began to hang out on the porch with the rest of us, go to the movies, or the Sufi dances we often attended as a group on Saturday nights. She had a wonderful, very distinct, infectious laugh. It was a real joy to be around. And in pondering what to share in this remembrance and thinking about Norman's vow about bringing forward something of his friend Alan Liu, I thought about which quality of Jishu would I bring forward in my life. She had two great spiritual qualities as a disciple and as a friend. As I said, her honesty, her truth, and her faith in the practice of listening, which she often talked about. It was something she really developed over the years. The listening ultimately energized her and pulled her out of her depressions, propelled her right straight ahead. Her dark clouds cleared more quickly. She became sparkly, a fresh, scrubbed farm girl with a glow about her. But this was no magic end to her suffering, because just as quickly as she'd begin to glow, she could go dim again, lamenting what she called her failures to be a good priest, her failure to drop her self-absorption or overcome her nervous exhaustion or her critical outbursts in times of overstimulation. And often she would say to me, "Why do you like me? Why do you keep being my friend? Do people in the Sangha want to know how you can stand living with me?" Well, here are some thoughts I wish I'd had myself when she asked me those questions. This is from a book by Norman, Taking Our Places, one of his early books. When long friendships with good people along the path of spiritual practice is a central feature of your life, it's almost impossible, just as the Buddha says, for spiritual qualities conducive to awakening not to ripen. For those on the Bodhisattva path, loving and appreciating your friends, even when they're difficult, as they sometimes are, that's the path's fullness, its completion. Friendship ripens and deepens our capacity for compassion. In the Buddhist path, spiritual friendship takes place in the context of community. Life in a Sangha is built on teaching, dedicated meditation practice, and a shared commitment to going beyond self-interest and personal need. Spiritual friendship is less about personal connection than it is about helping one another grow in faith and goodness, to realize, as we say in Zen, our true nature. Sangha friendships are forged and grounded in silence. This is especially true in the Soto Zen tradition, emphasizing meditation as a shared activity over a long period of time. In ordinary friendships, we might connect right away with lots to share and learn from one another. But in Sangha life, friendship develops much more slowly. It may take years to share backgrounds and personal stories. But maybe we never do. We still become deep friends. Often, the most unlikely people show up in Buddhist communities. People who under ordinary circumstances would never meet and spend weeks, maybe years together. And yet this disparate group of people manages to find harmony, commonality, and deep mutual appreciation despite their differences. They come to share something more fundamental than their interests and affinities. It's not unusual to be in a community with someone who pushes all your buttons. Exactly the sort of person you'd avoid at all costs in ordinary life will appear in your Sangha. There he or she is, your father or sister, your childhood nemesis, an ancient school or workplace enemy, sitting right across from you in the meditation hall. And you'll have to deal with that person in ways you never would have if left to your own devices. And eventually, they become a valued friend. The Buddha believed that spiritual friendship requires two elements, truth and tenderness. Spiritual friends are honest with one another. They have courage, they take risks, and they speak from the standpoint of truthfulness, not expediency. When my friends go astray, at least as far as I can see, I must speak up, and I expect the same from them as well. And of course, we expect that we can try to find kind speech, be generous, be of benefit to others as we are trying to have these kinds of friendships, to remember our collective identity and liberation. It's not a practice of one person being liberated. We all become liberated together. So having known Jishu all those years, as I say, we should have that to say to her. We lost touch on a regular basis when I left the White Plum Lineage in 1985. And then she married Bernie, and they began to travel constantly. We would write once or twice a year, Christmas, birthday. And I could tell that she was very excited and fulfilled, but also very tired. And you probably have seen more of these pictures. I'll just show you this one that seemed to me to really express, how they would practice together. This looks like it was a street retreat. But she and Bernie also would go to other difficult places, Auschwitz, the Great Plains of the Lakota Sioux people in South Dakota, and underground into the Bowery. So she and Bernie, as I said, founded the Zen Peacemaker Order. And there she was, listening to the healing power, not knowing and bearing witness and taking action together. And as the transmission of Buddhism from east to west continued to evolve and change in the 1980s and 90s, American Zen did become more visible as a holistic Buddha field, including peace and social justice, environmental protection, and human rights. It became clear that these places of conscience, as they're called, that the Zen Peacemaker Order was practicing in, were not only located where public human suffering and tragedies had occurred. These places are everywhere, in our forests, in our oceans, in our nursing homes, community health clinics, and our refugee camps, everywhere, including places of conscience in us. The listening led Jishu to writing the Zen Peacemaker Order commitments, which many of you may know, vows taken side by side with the precepts. Living the 10 precepts, I, Jishu, also commit to a culture of nonviolence and respect for living beings, a culture of solidarity and a just economic order, a culture of acceptance and a life of truthfulness, stewardship of the earth. By transferring this merit, I, Jishu, have committed myself to this peacemaker practice of renewing the rule of the Zen peacemakers, the refuges, tenets, and precepts for the duration of my life. her pain, which may have been, as I said at first, only personal in her understanding of it, became universal. She really could feel that bodhisattva vow of wanting to save and serve all beings, because she began to be able to listen and really feel the pain of the world. And that brought forward a wellspring of solidarity, creativity, propelling her right straight forward as she fell down and got up and fell down and get up. From her journal, I find that my own struggles are an integral part of my spiritual path, and that my awakening is very, very gradual. Only the wounded healer is able to heal. As long as we think spiritual leaders have to be perfect, we live in poverty. I have a perfect teacher inside. There is no perfect teacher outside. I only saw Jishu once again 13 years later in 1998, when she called me full of excitement a few days before her death. And she and Bernie arrived in Santa Fe, where I had lived for a decade. When I first saw her as she ran out to greet me, the fatigue around her eyes and the sallow color of her skin shocked me. But we were so excited to see each other, chirping away like little birds. We made tea. We began to hang pictures on the walls of their new adobe home, and we stayed up very late at night. We did that for 2 days, unpacking them. She was really happy to be able to retire. Maybe you'll join Zen Peacemakers, she smiled at me. We could practice together again. Our 2 days together had been so restorative and intimate, really magical for both of us. And the next day, she suffered a near-fatal heart attack. She rallied in the hospital a day later, starting to recover, but then a second heart attack. And she didn't make it. She died, to everyone's deep shock. The finality of it was so sudden, and grief, everything she had left behind. As Petra read more quotes from Jishu's final entries into the journal, it was so illuminating, after knowing her in the early years, to be able to hear how she had matured, how she had opened to her own love, to the depth and breadth of practice. I feel so grateful for Petra's talk, especially these words as Jishu prepared for transmission from Bernie. I'm in a state of not knowing who I am, not knowing what my values are or what my goals are. How will I get along? What will become of me? It's frightening, and at the same time, I feel hopeful. I'm trying to keep a phantom self alive. The farther I proceed toward Dharma transmission, the more precarious the existence of that self is. Maybe it has to be killed. I have to kill the idea that there's such a thing as realization or awakening for me. Everything, just as it is, leaves me with just who I am, which has never been acceptable for me. It was this just who I am, letting go practice for Jishu, the great disciple, her honesty, her devotion to healing, to practicing with her darkness as well as her light, her moving back and forth into the change, the perseverance, the patience, all of it for breaking through her shyness, depression, and grief to dream and create the Zen Peacemaker Order. Her final entry, it's so simple. It's life as it is. And if it's life as it is, then it must be me as I am. I don't have anything extra. I don't have to worry too much. I don't have to analyze or plan or think through all these things. They have their place. I create and listen. Being led. I just have to listen. So thank you, Jishu, for just listening, for being my spiritual friend, great disciple of truth, for opening to life as it is and me as I am, not turning away, going right straight ahead. You can't fall off the path. Thank you for listening to my long talk. Oh my. It was shorter in earlier versions.
Oh, that was wonderful, Jaune. Thank you so much. So moving to hear.
So lovely, T. So lovely.
Thank you.
I didn't know Jishu well. I practiced with her in Yonkers on several occasions with Bernie. I always experienced her as being very tired, and she always looked exhausted. And, you know, Bernie casts a large shadow, so I often felt that she was in his shadow to some degree, but she was always had a quality of being very honest and truthful. And when I had my Denkai ceremony, she was my preceptor, and she said, "Joshin, make these precepts accessible to everyone." That's what she told me.
I appreciate so much hearing you say that, and she would have loved to not look so exhausted all the time.
She was often in the background, and I experienced her listening a lot when other people were talking a lot.
I didn't show one photograph, the one that's on your altar. I wonder if I can do that one more screen share.
Yeah.
I have it. Yeah. It's my favorite photo of her.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah.
This was Jishu happy.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I love it.
Lovely.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, who has helped me and so many others have a record of our Zen life. I was
lovely that you could share about Jishu so everyone else can learn about her. She was amazing. We consider her our first woman American ancestor. That's why she's on our founder's altar. And I'm so grateful that you could share with such depth about who she was, how complex she was, and the many sides of Jishu. And yet what comes through is her devotion to service and the practice. She was always, when I was there, she was running the daycare center, and it was just nonstop.
And also, she helped me sew my first rakusu. And so I have shared what she taught me to everybody else who have sewn their rakusu in our Sangha. So she lives on through the rakusus also, which is, you know, our, yet with Jukai. Oh yes, and Shinko has hers on, beautiful. And Shinko also sewed her okesa, which I remember seeing Jishu in a beautiful okesa she had sewn. And what struck me was there was some Hawaiian fabric print in there. It's like, there's Hawaiian fabric in her okesa. She is something special. someone special is what I thought immediately. So, yes, she, that just.
I just wonder if Peter has anything to share.
Sure.
Putting you on the spot, Peter, sorry.
Hi. I just might add the idea of that Bernie changed his name to Bernie Jishu. He hyphenated his name. So Bernie always struggled with his ego, believe it or not. Jishu's great teaching for him was to get out of his ego self, to the extent that he struggled with it to the extent that he needed to rename himself. And the other thing, part of that is that I would see it at board meetings, she stood up to him in a way that nobody else did. And there were big fights in the board meetings. And Bernie needed that to help him get out of his ego. So I don't recall if she called herself Jishu Bernie.
I sort of hope not. But I'm going to be honest. Yeah.
They were trying to model a new male-female relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for adding that. Thank you to everyone for your attention, all that.
That was lovely. Thank you so much.
So much, John.
Thank you.
Hey, Peter and Ara. Wonderful to see you both.
Wow. Oh.
Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful Sunday. And we'll see you next week.